teacher, well, soon to be student teacher, I should say. This is going to be kind of a 15-minute lesson where I'm going to walk you guys through a few different things, mostly based on kind of literacy content for the course that I'm in. So yeah, we'll kind of go through and break down an analysis of a cartoon. I've got a reading excerpt that we'll go through, and then we're also just going to do super short writing activity at the end. So it shouldn't be too much to put on you guys here. So yeah, if you guys look right at the top, that's the political cartoon that we're going to be looking at. It's during the Civil War era. It's from a newspaper in New York. I actually don't know who the artist was, probably because it's pretty provocative, so they didn't want them to know who their name was. But looking at it right away, can you guys tell me what you probably think it represents? Anybody in here?
Looks like the North is fighting the South.
Okay, so that's actually the answer I was hoping somebody would say, right? Because when you do look at it, it certainly looks like this is the North defending itself against, snakes, dangerous snakes from the South, right? But actually, this is an artistic rendering of the Union defending itself from what's called the Copperhead Party. And this is actually a northern party that was anti-war. So I tell you guys this because what I want to cover today is kind of the perspective that the North would have had coming into the Civil War, and just how difficult that atmosphere would be, and why the North kind of continued to fight, in a pretty brutal Civil War. So yeah, that's the Copperhead Party, and as you can see, they're kind of, it's not very favorable. They're snakes. They have hats on that kind of look like salesmen of the time, right? And then the Union is, I think, probably a rendering of Statue of Liberty with sword and shield, defending herself. And I think it just encapsulates like the tension that would have existed in the North to kind of go on fighting a war that, you're losing a lot of people. The next part here is actually an excerpt from Lincoln's inaugural address, and I'm going to pick somebody out in the audience. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to read it. What I want you guys to do is read along, and for the sake of my class, this means nothing to you guys, but it means something to me. Highlight or underline anything that, if it's a word that you don't understand, if it's a phrase that you're like, what does that even mean? If you could highlight or underline it, it'll help me for the paper I'm going to write afterwards. So that would be great. So yeah, just go ahead and read along. And again, this is from Lincoln's inaugural address. So this would have been right after he was elected president. I think a few states had already seceded from the Union. So like, war was in the air. It was a pretty palpable thing. This is just 2 paragraphs from that speech, which it's a world famous speech at this point, but I think this just kind of encapsulates Abraham Lincoln and his motivations. So we'll kind of break it down a little bit afterwards. But in your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. The government will not assail you. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I have the most solemn one to preserve, protect, and defend it. I am loath to close. We are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break the bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. So if we want to take a look at why the North would be motivated to fight an entire civil war, instead of perhaps just letting the South secede and avoiding a war and having obviously 2 separate countries, a huge motivational factor for that is Abraham Lincoln. He's the president, the guy on top that makes the decision, especially leading our military. So his motivation and his thought process for fighting the war is huge. It's not the only reason at all. It's probably not even the biggest reason, but he is a huge motivating factor behind the war. So when we look at this excerpt from the speech, in the first paragraph is almost kind of a veiled threat, right? Like, if you secede, we're going to go to war and I'll stop at nothing to make sure that the Union stays together. And on the other hand, the second paragraph is more of kind of a statement of, we used to be family, we're brothers, we fought our independence against the most powerful country on the planet, right? So he's kind of, on one hand, having a fist, and on the other hand, trying to have an open hand to bring the South hopefully back in before they openly declare war. But I think it's a nice look into Abraham Lincoln and who he is. You know, he's super, super committed to his principles, while also being very compassionate. That was kind of how he was known. Does anybody have questions or comments about the excerpt? So, with all that being said, I just want to jump into what some of the key reasons would have been for the North. Again, the South obviously has all of their own reasons for fighting in a civil war, but from a Northern perspective, I think the biggest factor was probably economic concerns, right? So, the Northern economy obviously did not have slaves, and the South was built on slavery. But what that means in the South is that you have landowners, right, who own property and slaves. And if they want to expand west, what does that mean for Northerners who are getting paid to do their jobs, right? That means that they're taking the jobs of people who could be getting paid. Slaves are doing that. So it creates a certain amount of tension in the economy from top to bottom. Like, you're going to have people in the elite class, the wealthy people from the North, who are like, well, this is going to be hard to compete with. And then you're going to have people on the bottom who view themselves as losing their jobs on farms, or perhaps even an opportunity for them to go buy property and farm it themselves. So there's a lot of just straight up tension that exists economically between the North and the South. And that's been brewing for years. Literally since the country existed, we've had tensions regarding slavery. So slavery is, of course, tied into that. Preserving the Union, obviously that's a big one. It's kind of what Abraham Lincoln talks about a lot. There's an understanding both amongst the president and leaders that if we don't keep the country together, we're not going to be anywhere near as strong or as powerful. And keep in mind, we still live in a world where we're not the global powerhouse that we are today, right? So you have countries in Europe that they're concerned about that, could take advantage of an opportunity. So there is an opinion that they need to keep their country stronger by keeping it together. And Abraham Lincoln certainly understood that. And you can tell just from his memoirs and the things that he wrote that he was constantly thinking in the future about the country as well. So again, economic factors, preserving the Union was a big one. Keep in mind too that people were just straight up patriotic. I don't know the exact trajectory of that, but you would have your grandfather's grandfather who would have been a patriot in literally the American Revolution. So think about how those grandkids would have felt, or down that line. You would have a lot of patriotism still to keep your country together. So the last one here, again, to kind of touch back on the inaugural address. Again, it was Lincoln's leadership that really pushed this. A lesser president, when the war got bad, could have stopped and sought peace, in which case we would have had a fractured country. And a lesser president may have, not won the war. He kept putting time, resources, propaganda into fighting the war. And as a result, we have the country we have today. And we might not if it wasn't for Abraham Lincoln. So you gotta give him props. But yeah, so I'm gonna have you guys do kind of a short writing activity. It's just your guys' thoughts and opinions on why the North, went to war, or what the strongest cause was. It's just a couple sentences. You don't have to write a paragraph down or anything like that. It'll just give me a little bit to work with from my paper afterwards. But any comments, questions, anything anybody might have? Okay, so I'll give you guys a couple minutes. If you feel like you can't finish it in time, I'm just gonna sit in on the rest of class, so you can give it to me before you leave. It's no big deal. But I'll give you just a couple minutes here. If anybody has questions while people are writing, we can ask. How do I look?
We're good. It's an iPhone that's burning my hands.
done that's really confident in what they wrote, wants me to read it. Okay. Cool, so I'm gonna start wrapping up here. Again, if you're still writing, take your time, I'll collect it after class. But instead of forcing one of you guys to kind of share what you wrote, I kind of answered the question myself, which was that I just think that the Civil War is a consequence of a number of factors coming together. War is a pretty horrific thing. Any of you who have Netflix, you can watch a number of different war movies, and they're pretty good at depicting how kind of brutal it is. So the idea that you would go to war with your own countrymen, I mean, you have to have a lot of motivating factors to do that. And it built up over a really, really large period of time. And frankly, I think that almost by I don't want to say chance, but you know, Abraham Lincoln being in the position he was, there's a lot of things on a government scale that had to happen to put him there. And the fact that he was is kind of amazing. And the fact that somebody that had strong opinions about abolishing slavery for whatever reason, the fact that he was there when he was, I think we're pretty lucky as Americans. Of course, it took a huge toll on the country, but at the end of the day, generations of Americans have been better off for it. So I think, again, it's just all factors kind of coming together at the right time, and it exploded into a war. But without it, we wouldn't be who we are today. So that's my spiel. But no questions? Nobody? Okay. I think that's it. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. You can stop.